Thanks for taking the time to view this video presentation, which will take approximately 1 hour to complete. This video is designed to give all users an overview of how the new electronic medical record, or EMR form, is designed to function. For those agencies that have been using FieldBridge, you are used to seeing one type of form in FieldBridge and another type in VFib. In VAv3, the medical record forms are identical. So, whether you currently enter in runs using FieldBridge, or directly into VFib, or use a third-party vendor to submit records, this overview will be of benefit to all. Even though it's been mentioned before, it is important to note again that version 3 will collect over 3 times the amount of information as version 2. Keep this in mind when viewing the new medical record form. Things that had to be addressed as an agency-defined question before may now be part of the version 3 standard. For VAv3 administrators, when you obtain access to agency-defined questions, you should review the VAv3 data dictionary to make sure you're not getting ready to add something that is already there. It could be just worded differently. Also, if you find something that is part of the version 3 standard that your agency has used in the past, but see that it is not currently part of the form, let us know here at the Office of EMS. It may be something that we should add. However, it is important to note that we are only going to be making updates to items like this twice a year, and those will be scheduled in advance. We are doing this to avoid making random changes to anything in VAv3. Also, we are not going to be adding something that falls outside of the national standards. Again, if you're not sure about something, contact us using the contact information that will be coming up at the end of this video, and we'll be glad to check into it for you. We want to help you help us maintain good quality reporting. Also, we thought this would be a good time to reiterate a few items. The first one is when to submit medical records. Here's what is shown on page 60 of the Virginia Emergency Medical Services Regulations. The current schedule is that all medical records shall be submitted no later than 30 days after the end of the month. As shown here, you can see how that schedule looks. Real-time, or as close to real-time submissions as possible, is preferred, but this is the minimum requirement. Those agencies that fail to meet this minimum requirement risk being cited for compliance. The other item we wanted to reiterate was what is to be left at the hospital. Again, referring to the Virginia Emergency Medical Services Regulations, here's what is shown on page 113. Making sure that the proper paperwork is left at the hospital is a very important task for all providers. This helps ensure that the continuity of patient care is not broken. If needed, you can obtain a copy of the current regulations at the website shown here. Now, let's take a look at the new EMR form. Here we are looking at the standard Virginia Electronic Medical Record form. This blank record looks the same regardless of whether you are accessing the application online or using the offline VAv3 field application. If you are looking up an existing medical record, it will still look like this. Naturally, the difference would be that an existing record will already have information entered in. The different sections of the record are listed here on the left. Notice that each section has subsections. For example, the section labeled Response has the subsections labeled Unit and Crew Info, Response Info, and Times Mileage. As this is a blank form, you can see that there are a lot of items highlighted in red, indicating that they are required. The main section will remain highlighted in red so long as any of the subsections are still highlighted in red. In other words, the response section will remain red so long as Unit and Crew Info, Response Info, and Times Mileage are red. We'll see how these clear in just a few minutes. For those agencies that will be using VAv3 field to create records, you will see the words Elite Field at the top of the form as shown here. When accessing the EMR form using the online application, this wording will not appear. This was done so that a provider would know if they were online or offline. For the remainder of this overview, we will be using the online application. However, it is important to note that with the exception of some presets that can be done and the posting of runs, both of which are covered in another video, the functionality is exactly the same. Again, this only applies to those agencies that are currently using FieldBridge or will be using VAv3 field. Now let's fill in the unit and crew info. Notice that some fields have red exclamation marks. Let me show you how those can help you figure out what information is needed. If you take the mouse and click on these, it will show you the roll number and the description of that roll. This is useful when trying to figure out why something is showing up as a validation issue when you think everything is fine. If you can't figure out the problem, giving this information to either your VAv3 administrator or sending it over to support gives us a direction to go in troubleshooting the issue. Clicking on the red exclamation mark again will close the small window. These red exclamation marks appear everywhere information is required. Under EMS unit call signs, we have a drop-down list showing the 8 available choices. These are the same choices that are set up under our training agency numbered 5000 that has been created for individuals to use for practice. As a note, all of the items set up here, such as call signs, vehicles, and crew members, come from this training agency. Now back to the drop-down list. When your VAv3 administrator sets up the call signs and vehicles, the number of those items set up will determine how they are displayed on this form. Since we have more than 6 call signs, the application displays those in a drop-down list like this. Looking below the vehicles, we have 3 buttons showing on the screen. When the number of items set up are 6 or less, the application will display those as buttons like you see here. If this were not the case and an agency had, for example, 20 different call signs and 20 different units, the screen would literally be full of buttons and really difficult to navigate. We set this difference deliberately under our training agency so that we could demonstrate how both ways function. Now I'll choose a call sign and I'll select a vehicle. If I need to change the call sign, I can click on the down arrow and select a different one like this. I can also click on the X to clear the current selection if needed. If the vehicle needs to be changed, simply click on a different button and the selected vehicle changes. If I want to clear the vehicle selected, I can click on the selected vehicle again and the choice is cleared. Basically, all of the drop-downs and all of the buttons function in this same way. Now I'll set both my call sign and vehicle to Medic 1. Primary role of the unit is filled in by default, but you can change this just by selecting a different button. Since it is apparent in this video, and you can see it on the form, notice that the fonts in some of these buttons look different, or some of the words are cut off. This is an issue that we have reported to ImageTrend, and we are waiting on them to make corrections. For level of care, we'll select this down arrow and make the proper selection. For this demonstration, I am going to select ALS Paramedic. Now, under Crew Members, we're going to add agency personnel to this record. First, we'll select Add. This sub-window will open, showing additional fields to be filled in. Next, under Crew Member ID, we'll select the crew member's name. For those agencies that have a lot of crew members, you can use this find value to type in the name of the individual that you need to add here. For example, I'll type in Smith, and this will narrow the list to anyone who either has a first or last name of Smith. For this example, I'm going to choose the Admin 10 user. Next, I'll click on the down arrow under Crew Member Level, and I'm going to select EMT Basic. Now I'll select this symbol and choose the crew member response roles. Here you have the ability to select what the role of the crew member was during this patient encounter. For this individual, I'm going to select driver for the response and driver for transport. Notice that the window stayed open even after I made my selections. This does allow you to select all of the necessary roles for this individual that you are entering into the record. Once I have selected the needed roles for this individual, I can click on this symbol again to close out the list. Now I'll click OK to close out this sub-window. Notice that the red exclamation mark is still showing up in the crew members box. If we click here, we can see that I still need to specify a primary caregiver. To finish this up, I am going to add another crew member in the same way that we added the first crew member. This time I'm going to choose the Admin 11 user. Now I'll choose the crew member level, EMT Paramedic. Finally, I'll choose the role, which in this case will be the primary caregiver at scene and transport. Notice that as soon as I made those choices, the red exclamation mark went away. This typically happens each time a required field is addressed. I'll add one additional response role here. If you add one in error, simply select the X to the left of the item like this to clear it. I also want to go over the differences in how these sections work. Whenever you see the down arrow or chevron, this typically indicates that the list of items shown is a single select list. In other words, you can only make one choice. This symbol normally indicates that you can make more than one selection like we did when we chose the response role. When this X is selected, you are prompted with a warning message asking if you are sure you want to delete the crew member. I wanted to make sure to point this out, as this X is used to delete the crew member and not to close the sub-window. Be aware that when the application gives you a warning about deleting something and you choose yes, it is deleted, cannot be recovered, and would have to be re-entered if it were deleted in error. I'll click OK to close this sub-window out. If you need to review any crew member info, simply select it and the sub-window will reopen. If you need to clear any of the items here, just select any of the X's and the item will be cleared so that you can make another choice. Since no changes are needed, I'll select OK. One other item to mention before we move on. You can delete a crew member by selecting this X. You will see the warning screen that we saw earlier, where you have to answer either yes to delete or no not to delete. Even though we still need to review the other agencies on scene section, you can tell that all required information under the unit and crew info section has been addressed, since the tab to the left of this section has changed to blue as shown here. However, just because the required fields have been completed for this section doesn't mean that you would skip filling out other pertinent information. Keep that in mind. Even if something is not required but it did occur, it still needs to be documented. Under Other Agencies at Scene, you can document any other EMS or non-EMS agencies that may have responded to assist or were already on scene when you arrived. The licensed agencies are preloaded into the system, but your VAv3 administrator can go in and make adjustments so that only those agencies that would normally assist your agency show up in this list. The VAv3 administrator can also go in and set up those non-EMS agencies, such as city or county police, so that you can have those as available selections should you need them. If the first responder is not the correct choice, you can select the down arrow and change this to another choice. Next, select the down arrow under Other EMS or Public Safety Agency at Scene and choose the agency that was there. Don't forget that you can use the Find Value option to enter in the name and find the agency faster than scrolling if your list is large. Once I've made my selections, I'll choose OK. For those agencies that will be using the offline version or VAv3 field, you can preset crew, vehicle, and call sign information, which would fill in automatically. Please reference the VAv3 field setup video on how this is done. Now we'll go to Response Info. On this screen, you will notice that certain items are already selected. As with other items that you will see, any of the defaults can be changed and should be changed when needed. For example, if the record you are documenting was for a canceled call, naturally you would click on the chevron and select the proper cancel disposition. You could also select the X to remove the disposition and then select the chevron to make another choice. For this example, I am going to leave the disposition as treated and transported by this EMS unit. You should be aware that there may be more than one way to make any of the selections I'm going to show you. I'll make sure that you see the various ways to use these options, but I may not show them on each selection. Just be aware that most of the time, the drop-down list, the search options, the buttons, and other types of options typically work the same throughout the application. Vehicle Dispatch Location allows you to select the location your vehicle was dispatched from. This list comes from the list of active facilities and agency locations that the VAv3 administrator has set or created. Incident number is where you can enter the unique number that your agency uses to track incidents. I'll make one up for this example. For those of you that have been using the Auto Incident Number feature in FieldBridge, we will let everyone know once that function has been added to VAv3. Until then, check with your VAv3 administrator for the proper format to use when entering this in. Under Type of Service Requested, 911 Response defaults in, but you can select any of the others below as needed. Dispatch priority, like Type of Service Requested, defaults to Priority 1. If needed, you can change this to another priority simply by selecting one of the other buttons. Or you can choose to select the button to deselect it like this. However, since the items are now outlined in red, it is a required field and will need to be selected at some point. I'll go back and reselect Priority 1. Use this field to record the complaint reported by dispatch. Don't forget that you can use the Find Value option to search on what you are looking for. Here you can choose your response mode to scene. You'll notice here that we have the same font issue as I showed you earlier that has been reported to the vendor. For your information, the second button is supposed to display emergent downgraded to non-emergent, and the fourth button is supposed to display non-emergent upgraded to emergent. The additional response mode descriptors is used to document if different response modes were used. The default is lights and sirens, but you can select from this list for whatever the situation calls for. When the section is larger than what the screen can display, scroll bars like this will automatically be provided. Even though this is normal functionality with any application, I thought I would point it out. Now we'll scroll down and continue filling in information. Incident location type is pretty straightforward, as it is where you document the location type you responded to, such as home, school, or public building, just to name a few. Here you can document if you were the first EMS unit on scene or not. Notice here that we have the Other Agencies on Scene box again. This is a duplicate of the Other Agencies on Scene section that we saw under the Crew and Unit Info tab. Some items like this were placed on different areas of the medical record form to assist in filling out information. But this doesn't mean that you have to fill these items out twice. Whatever you enter into one automatically shows up under the other. As you can see here, the information shown is exactly what was entered in under the Unit and Crew Info section. But let's demonstrate this. I'll select Add. I'll choose Other EMS Agency. Now I'll choose OEMS Rescue Squad Second. And I'll click OK. Now I'll go back to Unit and Crew Info, and you can see that we now have the new entry here as well. Now from the unit and crew info section, I'll delete this new entry. Now, going back to the response info section, you'll notice that the second entry is no longer here. I just wanted to show you that where certain items are on the form multiple times, it doesn't need to be filled out twice. Here you can specify the number of patients it's seen. The multiple patients functionality should be added very soon, and we'll send out notifications when this occurs, along with a short video update to describe how it functions. Now we'll scroll down and finish filling out this section. The next 7 fields really don't need any explanation. They all deal with the incident address and are really self-explanatory. You can enter in the zip code and use the Set from Postal Code button to select the city, county, and state. This basically works the same as what you are used to in version 2. I'll enter in 23059 and click on the button. Notice the list comes up with the possible matches. I'll choose the one that I need, and the other information is filled in. You can see here that any sort of delay can be documented. You will also notice that the delays listed under each choice are unique to that choice. Here we see delay reasons that are unique to dispatch. Here the reasons listed are unique to the response. And finally, these reasons are unique to the scene. Since these choices have this symbol, you can select as many of these delay reasons that would apply. Notice that response info is no longer red and the red exclamation point is gone, which indicates that all of the required fields have been addressed. But, as with the other sections, it is still important to fill out the record as completely as possible, even if the field is not highlighted as required. Before we look at the times and mileage section, there is something that needs to be emphasized. In VAv3, time is more heavily evaluated. Due to limitations in version 2, it was possible to enter in things that, from a chronological point, didn't flow properly. For example, version 2 would allow the submission of a record where the unit back in service date and time occurred prior to the unit en route time. Even though this was a rare occurrence, normally associated with runs that crossed over midnight where the time entered was correct, but the date was not, a record entered in like this would submit. That is not the case in VAv3. There are a lot more validation rules in place regarding time, so if the times entered into a medical record doesn't flow properly, then the record will not post or submit. For those agencies using third-party software packages that submit records in groups or batches, all it takes is one record with times that are out of sequence to prevent the entire batch of records from processing. Keep this in mind if you're having issues trying to submit a record. Now let's look at the times and mileage section. As we go through this section, notice that everything is listed from the top down in the sequence that a run would typically unfold. In this case, we have a treated and transported by EMS unit selected for the disposition, so the times flagged as being required are related to that disposition. However, I'll go back to response info and change the disposition to canceled prior to arrival. Now, under times and mileage, you can see that the required times have changed. This is just one example of how the different dispositions will either require or not require certain types of information. Keep in mind that if the record is showing a required time that doesn't make sense, or is not showing that a time is required that should be, check the disposition. Now I'll go back to response info and change the disposition back to our original selection. I also want you to notice that there's another option for time located here. We'll review that in just a moment. Now let's look at how these date and time fields work. This first field is used for entering in the date. The second field is used for entering in time. When selected like this, the button with the clock symbol will fill in the corresponding date and time fields to the left with the current date and time. This last button allows access to the not values. It is important to note that these should only be used when no other value makes sense. That is true not only of the time entries, but anywhere these symbols appear. There will be certain instances where there may be valid choices listed under these, and I will try to ensure that I point them all out. To change or enter in the date and time, simply select the field. Notice that this pad appears on the screen once the field is selected. Anytime you select either a date or time field in any section, this pad will appear. For those of you using a Toughbook, some other tablet device, or any computer with touchscreen capabilities, this is something that should make doing these entries easier. I'll clear the date and time that was automatically filled in and enter that information in manually. We'll review the pad functions in just a moment. As I enter in the date, I don't have to enter in the slash marks. Those will fill in automatically. You will also notice that I entered in 15 for the year instead of 2015. The system automatically enters in the first 2 digits of the year. However, I can still enter in 2015 if I choose to. Now I'll tab over to time. As with the date, entering in the colons between the numbers is not necessary as they will fill in automatically. Also with time, the entry of the seconds will default to 00 if they are not manually entered in. You'll notice that the first two digits of the year and the seconds will fill in automatically as I move on to the next field. Now I'll enter in the unit and route time manually as well. First I'll start with the date. When the date was entered, see how the unit notified by dispatch field changed to red. This is because I have not yet entered in the time. Currently with a time set like this to all zeros, the system sees this as happening before the first entry, which is counter to flowing chronologically. These are good visual cues to notice if there are any issues with date and times. Notice that as soon as I correct this, the unit notified by dispatch field is no longer highlighted in red. Even though first responder arrival time is marked as optional, I'm still going to manually enter in the time this unit arrived. Now in the unit arrival on scene time, I'll use my computer's mouse and show you how the pad works. If you're using a stylus or a touchscreen, the buttons still work the same. The first thing to notice are these buttons here. For the moment, only current is not grayed out. The others labeled on scene, patient arrival, and destination arrival are. As we fill in more date and time fields, those will also become available. Looking here, you can also tell which date and time field you have currently selected. I'll select current. Now I can use these buttons to adjust my entry. Notice that each time I press the minus button, the time displayed goes back 1 hour. The plus signs have the opposite effect and add 1 hour each time it is selected. The minute options work exactly the same. Minus causes the minutes to go back by 1, and the plus moves the minutes up by 1. These buttons here have the same function. The minus and plus 5 buttons will either advance or back up the time by 5 minutes, while the minus and plus 1s will move time by 1 minute intervals. The date section works in the same way. These buttons will either advance or move back the day by 1. These buttons will either advance or move back the month by 1. And these buttons will either advance or move back the year by 1. Now that I've shown you how these options work, I'll enter in the time that I actually need. Once you make a selection outside of the time or date field, the pad will disappear. I'll finish filling in the remaining date and time information. Now that I've entered in the unit arrival on scene time, I can use the on scene button to fill in the date and time. I'll go to the next field and use that option. This allows the selection of a time that is closer to the actual time that is required. While using the current date and time button would place information into this field, it may be information that would need to be adjusted quite a bit. Using the on-scene time should give us a time that is much closer to what we actually need. As you can see here, I only needed to add 2 minutes to my time. I've selected the unit left scene time, and now I can use the patient arrival time, since that button is now available, and make the proper adjustments. Arrive at hospital is next, and I'll use the same functionality to adjust that time. Finally, the last time entry here required is back in service. Since the destination arrival button is available, I can use that to enter in a time close and then make the same slight adjustments that we've been doing. Once that last time entry was filled in, the section is now showing blue, indicating that the required fields have been completed. You will also notice that the time option in the upper right corner of the screen is no longer showing up as red. However, you should still fill out any other time fields that are relevant. Before moving on to the mileage fields, I'll show you the time form slide out. I'll select this time symbol and the other entry screen for date and time will appear. The fields listed here are exactly the same as what we were just looking at. You can see that all of the entries that were made are also showing up here. It's up to you if you use this screen to enter in your date and time information or the other screen. The only thing to point out is that the keypad does not have all of the same type of functionality. The back button goes back 1 character, as you can see here, and the clear button clears out both entries. The other buttons on the form function exactly as they are labeled. However, the nice thing about this slide out is that you can access it from any tab. So if you need to reference the times you entered when filling out something else related to time, you can use this without having to go back to the time and mileage section. I'll add my date and time back in. To close this slide out, select either this X or the Times button again. These last four fields deal with odometer readings. You can use these to enter in that information. There's also another slide out here that can be used to enter in mileage. We'll do these first and then I'll show you the slide out. Notice that a different type of pad comes up when I select this field. This pad is designed just to enter in numbers. I'll just quickly enter in my odometer readings. Now let's look at the mileage slide out. You can see the same information is shown here, but there are also some totals that are calculated. This pad has an additional set of buttons at the top designed to add miles to the entry by either tenths, 1 mile, or 5 miles at a time. As with times, you can use either entry screen that you want, and you can close this slide out by either selecting the X or selecting the mileage button again. Now that all of the required time entries have been filled in, you'll notice that the response section is now showing up as blue. This means that all of the required fields for each subsection have been filled in. The next section is labeled Patient Encounter. We'll go through each of the subsections one at a time. As I start showing you how these next sections work, it is important to note that I may not do all of the things that normally would be done on an actual response. For example, when I get to the vital signs section, I am only going to demonstrate a single entry. In a real situation, you may have multiple vital signs to enter. While I will fill in what is required, our goal for this video is to give you a basic overview of how everything works and where everything is located. Under Patient Info, the basic information about patients can be entered in. Here you can see that we have the Repeat Patient button. For now, the Repeat Patient option only works when accessing the medical record form online. Once this functionality has been made available when using VAv3 Field, we will update this presentation. As with version 2, you can use this to search for individuals that you have previously created medical records for. If you select the button and see the following message, this indicates that the Repeat Patients functionality has not been set up by your agency's VAv3 administrator. Once this has been enabled, you will see this screen where you can search for the individual using a variety of different items. Once the list comes up, it can be ordered by these choices. This is useful for those agencies that perform medical transports, but can be used by any agency. For now, I'm going to manually enter in the patient's name. I'm always mindful of patient identifiable information, so I typically make up very generic information when I am creating records for training purposes like this video. As I enter in the name, I want you to notice this section of the screen. Here I'll enter in first for my first name, and I'll enter in last for my last name. Did you see how the name filled in at the bottom? Since this section of the screen doesn't change, you can keep track as to who the individual is that this record is for. Gender and race are both very obvious as to what is required, so I'll make a couple of selections here. However, you can select more than one choice under race if needed. Next, I'll enter in the patient's date of birth. Notice that once I selected this field, another pad appeared. I'll use this pad to show you how it works. The date of birth I'm going to use for this example is January 1st, 1970, so I'll make those selections. Notice that as soon as I click out of this field, the age automatically calculates. So long as you have all of the times filled in under the times and mileage section, this will calculate for you. Now I'm going to clear out the date of birth and show you something else. This time I'm going to enter in the date of birth as January 1st, 2015. Notice how the age calculated at 3 and the button below automatically changed to months. I'll clear everything out and show you this one more time. This time I'll enter in a date that's 7 days ago. Now the unit selected automatically switched to days. I'll reset everything one more time. Now I'll enter in today's date. It automatically selected hours. I just wanted you to see how this works. For now, I'm going to re-enter January 1st, 1970 for the date of birth. Now we'll scroll down and review the remaining items. The address fields work the same as we saw earlier. The one difference is that we can use the same address as the instant address by selecting this button. Outcome External Reports is a section that you can use to record additional paperwork or reports that you may receive regarding your patient. I'll select Add and show the options that are available. The External Report ID number field is a free text field which you can use to enter in the ID number of the associated report you received for your patient. Select the down arrow and you can select one of these available choices. You can enter in as many of these as are needed simply by selecting the Add button. For now, I'm going to select the X and answer Yes to delete this subform. Even though the Patient Info tab is no longer highlighted in red, it is always good practice to scroll back up and review what was entered in to be sure that nothing has been missed. The next section we are going to review is Past Medical History. Since everyone is familiar with electronic reporting, most all of these should be very obvious. I'll go through and point out some of the functionality as these items are filled in. Barriers to patient care defaults to None Noted. If you need to make a change, be sure to remove this. Notice that if I add one without removing this, it flags as red. As soon as I remove it, the flag goes away. I did this to illustrate that there are additional validity rules written around barriers to patient care. In version 2, you could have an unconscious patient, yet the record still expected you to be able to answer certain questions when it was obviously not possible to do so. In VAv3, the system doesn't expect you to be able to supply certain answers if the barrier to patient care logically means that you can't get those answers. For this example, I'm going to switch back to None Noted. In medical surgical history, you can use the Find Value here to search on keywords to locate the information needed. There are also a couple of options here that may apply. Current medications, medication allergies, and environmental food allergies information can be documented here. The Find Value option is available on all of these, so we do recommend using this since the list for each of these are quite extensive. As with other items on this screen, these final items are very straightforward as to what is required, but I would like to point out a couple of things. Last oral intake is a date and time field, so it works just like the others we have reviewed. For pregnancy, this option does have a few other choices that may apply when recording this information. Now I'll scroll back up to review things and move on to the next section, which is assessment. Again, we have the barriers to patient care noted. As demonstrated earlier, this is not something that you need to fill out twice. Whatever you select on one screen is automatically reflected anywhere else this may appear. Next, we have cardiac arrest indicator. I want you to notice something here. As soon as I select No, notice that the cardiac arrest tab went from red to blue. Once you select No here, the form no longer expects any cardiac information to be entered, although we will still review this section. The same thing happens with injury trauma. For this example, I'll unselect No and answer this when we review the injury trauma section. Patient acuity is filled in simply by selecting the correct button. In this section, we can record the complaints from the patient. Simply select Add and fill in the blanks like this. You can do this for as many complaints as needed. Here we'll choose Back. Now we'll choose Musculoskeletal. And under Primary Symptom, we'll select Pain Back. Date and time of onset is recorded here. Any other symptoms can be recorded in this section. Again, notice that when this symbol is shown, it indicates that more than one choice can be made. The impressions are recorded here, as well as any indications for evasive airway. Alcohol drug use can be noted here, and there are additional options under this symbol that are also available. Body weight is optional as far as being required by the state unless the patient is less than 7 years of age. But do notice that when you enter in one of these values, the other is automatically calculated. Mass casualty indicator defaults to no, and triage classification choices can be selected here. Now we'll take a look at the injury trauma section. The possible injury choices shown here and the injury indicator choice on the assessment section are one and the same. Since I didn't make my selection there and I haven't made a selection here yet, the assessment tab is still showing up as red. However, I'll choose yes and you'll see that the assessment tab color changes from red to blue. Cause of injury can be filled out here. Once we selected a type of fall as the cause of injury, the application is now requiring that the height of the fall be documented. These last fields are well labeled as to what should be selected here, and all function the same as has been previously demonstrated. Be sure to fill out all that apply. Since this is not a cardiac arrest record, nothing is required to be filled out on this page. However, I'll scan through these, and you can review them later when you start to practice entering in medical records. Notice that if I select anything, the cardiac arrest tab changes to red. The form understands that no was selected next to cardiac arrest indicator, so it doesn't expect anything on this page to be filled out. Since we did select something, now the form is prompting us to review other items by highlighting those in red. Once I clear this choice, everything returns to its previous state. The description of each of these choices in this section should give you a very good idea of what is required when you are documenting a cardiac arrest medical record. This next section is used to record provider actions. Notice that vital signs is the only item showing as required. When there is patient treatment documented, one set of vital signs is expected to be taken. However, be sure to fill out each of these sections as completely as possible when needed. Let's review these. Under Protocols, simply click on Add and make the necessary choices. The subform that comes up when selecting Assessment of Patient is rather large and has some additional subforms within it. But here you can record all assessment information. First I'll enter in the date and time of the assessment. I'll use the pad shown to enter these in. Different statuses can be filled in here. I'll go through and quickly fill some of these in to show you how they function, but you should review all of these once you begin to practice. On most of these selections, the normal choice was placed at the top. The assumption being that normal would be the most selected choice, so we didn't want to make providers constantly have to search for this. When I select spine exams, notice that additional fields are displayed. Each of the items with an Add option all work the same. There may be some items on this page that I didn't fill out that you normally would when documenting a medical record. Keep in mind that the goal of this video is to give you a general overview of the electronic medical record form and how this application functions. So, even if I don't fill something out for this demonstration, you should make sure that any actual medical records you create are filled out as completely as possible. At the top of the assessment window, you can select Add Another, and the application will automatically save the current information and will allow you to begin another one. The OK option saves the current record and will return us back to the Provider Actions screen. The Cancel option will cancel any changes you might make to an existing assessment when you reopen one to review. Once everything has been entered in, select OK to save. Next, I'll select Add and enter in vital signs. For this example, I'm only going to enter in one partial set so that you can see how these work. However, the application does allow for you to document as many vital signs as are needed. Again, since everyone is accustomed to electronic reporting, there should not be any surprises as to the descriptions of each of these. We'll just quickly scan through some of these, but you'll be able to spend more time here as you create practice runs. Here, I'll record my time. I selected these options to demonstrate that the score does auto-calculate a total. Now I'll finish entering in some additional items. I'll do blood pressure and method, pulse and rhythm. Finally, I'll enter in respiratory rate and effort along with documenting the pain scale. Once I have entered in everything that is needed, I'll select OK to save. To record any procedures performed, select Add and fill in the appropriate fields. If any medications were given, those can be documented here. I am not going to save what I am about to show you here, but I want to enter in a few items so that we can review a couple of things. All of the medication choices are set by the NMSIS standards. In the past, there have been issues where agencies have created or requested to have additional medication names made available. For example, instead of aspirin, agencies would create or request to add names such as aspirin 81 milligrams, or aspirin 325 milligrams, or aspirin 500 milligrams. Having several names to describe the dose is not necessary. You simply have to select the medication and then enter in the appropriate dose and units. The other item I want to point out deals with the role assigned to crew members giving the medication. For this example, I'll choose adenosine. Now I'll choose one of my crew members. And I'll choose EMT Basic for the role. Notice that the role is still highlighted in red. There are validation rules in place to validate that the proper role has been selected for the medication given. I'll change this to paramedic, and you can see now that the role is no longer highlighted. Having said this, if your agency has any challenges with medications or any of the defaults that are set up in the application, please have your VAv3 administrator contact us, and we'll be glad to discuss the options available. We are open to making things work as smoothly and as efficiently as possible, and we want to work with you in this process. Since I didn't have anything here that I wanted to save, I'll select Cancel. Any management of or airway control that was needed can be recorded here. Finally, medical device information is recorded here. When choosing this, be sure to fill out all pertinent information. Our last section under Patient Encounter is Narrative. This first field is used to record the name of the crew member that is completing the entire record, not just the narrative. Use the Enlarge button to bring up a full screen version of the narrative form. Notice that when I misspell something, the spell check feature comes directly from the browser program being used. On this screen, the Clear option will erase what you've typed in below and does not provide any secondary warning, as you can see here. The OK option will save what has been entered, and the Cancel option will cancel any changes if you are going back into a previously created narrative. I'll select OK to save what is entered here. The Clear option on this screen will clear the narrative as well, but does provide a secondary warning message. I'll select No. Now that the narrative section is complete, it, along with the Patient Encounter section, has changed from red to blue, indicating that all required fields have been addressed. Now we'll look at the Transport section. Here you can see that there are several defaults that fill in automatically. However, if those are not accurate, be sure that you make any needed changes. I'll fill in what is needed here. The disposition and transport method comes from what we selected earlier under the response section. For number of patients, I'll enter in 1. Here we'll document how the patient was moved. Our transport mode was non-emergent, so we won't need to change this. Note that some of these buttons are not showing all of the information. As noted earlier, this has been reported. Any additional transport modes can be listed here. Here we can document the position of patient during transport. We can also document the destination information. Please note that your list of destinations can be narrowed by the ones you normally transport to by your VAv3 administrator. If any hospital specialty teams are activated, the type of team and the time of activation can be documented. These buttons are used to note the condition of the patient when you arrive at the destination. Here's another place where you can document any external reports provided as we demonstrated earlier. And finally, any delay information can be noted here. The routine transport address section was created to be used by those agencies that engage in non-911 transports, such as taking individuals to doctor's appointments. This is merely a way for those agencies to document that information. With the transport section complete, our record is validated at 100%. However, we still have several other sections to review. In the billing section, we have tried to add as many pertinent billing items as we could. This was based on a review of what agencies have set up in VFib that currently use VFib for billing. It's worth noting that NMSIS version 3 has much more fields relating to billing than version 2, so agencies were limited in what was available. If your VAv3 administrator doesn't see something that your agency needs in regards to billing, please let us know here at the Office of EMS. We'll check to see if the item or items are covered in the version 3 standard and make the best recommendation we can on how to proceed. For now, here's all of the default billing information we have added to the medical record form. The billing info section collects general information. Insurance info can be used to collect general insurance information, such as insurance company and policy information, just to name a few. Just select Add, fill in the information, and click OK to save. The supplies section is still currently under development, so check this section periodically to see when additional fields are added here. Finally, the last section is for the physician certification statement. There's another piece of functionality I would like to point out while in the billing section. You'll notice the Save option at the top of the screen. When I select it, the button turns gray for a moment, indicating that it is saving the record. However, in case you haven't noticed, when I switch from one section to another like this, the button grays out then as well. Each time you switch between tabs in any of the sections, the application autosaves the record. For those agencies that will be using VAv3 Field, the autosave function works there as well. I thought I would point this out. Under Signatures, you can add the various reasons and signatures that are required. Simply select Add Signature and fill out what is needed. The information shown here will vary based on the reason selected. Currently, if needed, an individual has to sign separately for each reason necessary. We are waiting on the vendor to make an adjustment to this so that an individual can sign once for multiple reasons. Once that occurs, we will update this video and let you know. The Enlarge button makes the signature area larger, and the Reset button will clear the signature so that the person can try again. I'll select OK to save this. Once any entry is saved like this, you can select it to reopen it so that it can be changed or updated. Also, selecting this X will prompt you to delete the selected entry. Anytime an entry is saved in this manner, such as with signatures or provider actions, they can be reopened or deleted in this way. With the signature section completed, this covers the basic layout of the new medical record form. If you recall, currently in VFib, there are different types of medical record forms, while in VAv3, we only have this one major form. The current plan is to have a form that employs specific visibility rules. This functionality will allow the system to utilize this one medical record form for all agencies. For example, once this is in place, agencies that have their billing option set to no would not see the billing choices on the form at all. This work is ongoing, and we hope to have this in place soon. Once it is ready, we will let everyone know when this is going to be deployed. Now let's look at some of the other options available on the screen. At the bottom of the screen, as shown earlier, we have the patient's first and last name. Under the Power Tools option, you have the ability to access the power tools that are available in VAv3. You can also access those power tools here, which I will demonstrate in just a moment. The one option that is only located here is the Import Local EKG. When this is selected, you will be prompted to manage this process. If these devices are used by your agency, your VAv3 administrator should have this set up and can show you how this can be used. Under Validation, you can access any validation issues that are remaining with the record you are working with. Let me remove something from this record to illustrate. Under Response, I'll remove the primary role of the unit. Now I'll switch to a different section so that I can illustrate the complete functionality. When I select Validation, items that still need to be addressed will be shown here with this arrow. When I select the arrow, the screen switches to the section that needs to be corrected. I'll reselect my choice and the record will go back to 100%. Under Menu, the choices available depend upon your level of access. For this presentation, we will review all of the options available. Just remember that if you don't see a specific one when you're logged in under your account information, check with your VAv3 administrator. This individual at your agency will determine what level of access you have in VAv3. Under Attachments, you can add or view attachments to any record that you have access to. Just select Attachments and then select Add New. Select the down arrow to choose the type and then choose Browse to find the file that you want to attach to the record. Once done, select OK and the item will be attached. It is important to note that the direct scanning functionality has not yet been added to VAv3. ImageTrend is working on this feature, and we will let you know once that has been implemented. Here you have the ability to view the Instant Audit Report. This report will give you a list of who, when, and what actions have taken place on this record. The list can be narrowed by date range if you enter in a date here. You can also search based on any item shown. These two arrows allow you to page back and forth between the different pages of the audit report. This X will close the screen once you have finished. The next option allows you to delete the record currently being viewed. You will receive a warning message like this. As stated here, this action cannot be undone, so if the record is deleted in error, you will have to manually recreate it. There is no recovery action that we can take. The lock option allows you to lock a record. I'll lock this one so that you can see what a locked record looks like. If you are viewing a locked record and you have access, you can unlock the record from here as well. I'll leave this record unlocked so that we can continue. The Status section allows the user or reviewer to set a status on a record. This is typically done during the QA process. Depending on how you set up your screen to view existing medical records in VAv3, there is a column available that will show these different statuses. This functionality is discussed in the video that covers online access to VAv3. It is up to each agency to determine if they are going to use these, but they are available. As was noted earlier, these options allow access to the power tools that are currently available. The power tool options are designed more around devices that have touchscreen capabilities, but can be utilized by other computers. It is important to note that these options are also available under Patient Encounter in a more non-touchscreen format, as we previously demonstrated. I'll only review the basic functionality of each, but you should fill out everything completely if you choose to use these. Let's check each one of these out and you can determine which ones you will use. The Assessments Power tool allows for a different method of recording an assessment. If I select all normals, then everything is set to normal. At the bottom of the screen, I can clear all of the tags, which means starting over again. If there are only certain items that need to be marked as normal, I can select Tag Normals and then begin making the needed selections like this. Once finished, I can select Done Tagging and now begin to fill out the other items as needed. Now I can select the individual item and make other selections. Under Details, I can document any notes. As noted here, using the NP Tag mode allows you to tag any item above as exam finding not present. All of the other options work the same, although the selections under each will be unique to the item selected. Once you have made all your selections, select OK to save. Since this is for demonstration purposes, I'm going to select Cancel and not save any of this information. The Vitals Power Tool works in a similar manner. Here you can select the crew member that took the vitals, the date, the time, or if it was done prior to arrival. One item of functionality I want to show is how the choices work. For example, under Patient Position, I'll select More so that you can see all of the available choices. Notice that supine is located here. Once I select that, it becomes the first choice in the list and is highlighted to indicate that it was the choice made. If I click on it again to deselect it, it goes back to its original position. By the choice that is selected becoming the first item listed, this helps to know that something has been answered and what the answer was without having to go back and select More again. Also notice that this pad will appear whenever a numeric field is selected. Now I'll select Cancel, and we'll look at the next power tool. In Medications, you can enter in any medication information that pertains to the patient's current care. Medications are listed either under Favorites or otherwise more frequently used, or are listed alphabetically. Simply choose the medication in question and make the necessary selections. As with Vitals, crew member, date and time, as well as prior to arrival notations can be documented here. As with the previous power tool, any choices made will automatically move up to the first position like this. You can also switch to another medication if you realize that you selected the incorrect one. Now I'll cancel this entry and move to the next power tool. This power tool can be used to document procedures. Simply select the procedure performed and fill out the information. All of the options here work the same as have been previously demonstrated. I'll cancel this and we'll look at the last power tool. The GCS power tool will allow you to make the same types of entries we did earlier. Notice that the score is automatically totaled here once the proper selections have been made. There is one thing to note about these power tools. Some of the options needed for validation are not found on these screens. It is possible that if you use the power tool, you may still have to go into the Provider Actions section and finish filling out those items that are not yet part of the power tool screen. For example, I'll save the GCS information that was just entered. If you look below, you can see that the record no longer scores 100% but is now at 95%. I'll go to Patient Encounter and open this new entry. If you notice here, you can see that the record still needs prior to arrival information filled in, which is currently not available on the GCS Power Tool screen. Any instance of this has been noted, but you should let your VAv3 administrator know if you encounter any issues as you begin to practice so that those can be sent over to us. Once I remove this record, the score is again 100%. If you need to search for a specific field, you can enter that here. For example, I'll enter in weight and select this choice. My screen automatically goes to this. This is useful when you need to review something and you're not 100% sure which section the item is located in. As noted earlier, the Save option is used to manually save the work done on the record. The two printout options allows you to create either an HTML printout using the browser, or you can create a PDF printout. Both printouts look exactly the same. The CAD option is only for those agencies that have their own ImageTrend CAD product and want to be able to download information from that into the medical record form. The final option is Close. When you select Close, the record will save and you will go back to your list of incidents. There is one item not shown here, and it only applies to those agencies using the offline version or VAv3 field. In addition to these options at the top, there is also a post option. When connected to the Internet, this option allows you to post this single record directly to VAv3. Well, that concludes this presentation covering the current functionality and options available for the electronic medical record. As updates are made, we will communicate those out and provide updates to this presentation as quickly as possible. If you have any questions on the items that we discussed, please check with your VAv3 administrator or contact us here at the Office of EMS using the information shown on the screen. Thanks for watching, and we hope you have a great day.